Hello, spiritual seeker. This is Deepa Lou, and I'm the creative mystic. And I ring this bell to awaken you to your divine presence that's within you 24/7. So today I was inspired and guided to talk to you about how to overcome a spiritual rut and stay inspired spiritually. I've been on the spiritual path a long time, and if you've been on the spiritual path a long time, you know sometimes it can be challenging to not get into a spiritual rut, to stay inspired. There is a difference between not being in a rut and staying inspired. One of the things about when you get on the spiritual path for a long time, it's very easy to fall into spiritual practices that you do that it becomes out of a habit. And then after you do it as a habit for a while, you start to do it just because you should do it or because you think, the rules say you should do it. And that can turn into a rut. And so the first thing you need to develop or start to really pay attention to is how are you feeling? You have to become really aware of when you're starting to do your practices out of habit or because you should, rather than I'm doing it because I really want to, because I feel inspired. And here's the thing, the reason why you want to stay inspired is you want to be sitting down to your spiritual practice every day with the intention and the hope that you're going to have a mystical experience. That's why I'm called the creative mystic. It's all about having mystical experiences, and you don't want to be in the rut. You want to be in the mystical experience. But how do you maintain that after you've been on the path for a long time to not fall into that rut? If you're doing the same practices every day, maybe you meditate, maybe you chant, maybe you do prayers, maybe you do all three. So I have been on the spiritual path many years. I started on the path being a Buddhist, got introduced to it, was like, wow, this is for me. I started chanting. And one of the things I learned on that path they taught me three components you needed in your practice, in being on the spiritual path. And that was faith, practice, and study. You had to study whatever spiritual philosophy you believed in. You had to practice your spiritual techniques, tools, and you had to have faith. At least enough faith that, you know, this is going to help you. Enough faith to actually do the practices, okay? But what I found is those three things did not keep me out of a rut and did not keep me necessarily inspired. And so through my own development, spiritual development and exploration, because, as I was on the path longer as a Buddhist, I started to realize how I was really curious. I would always ask people about their spiritual path. I would, like if they were Christian, I wanted to know about it. If they were, Sikh, I wanted to know about it. I wanted to know about other people's spiritual practices and paths. So I would find out and listen to them. And I started seeing these threads of truth that were all in all of them. And so I became, where I got to the point after I'd been on it a while where I saw that, oh, there's this oneness in all spiritual paths. And I started to realize that the reason why there are so many different religions and so many different spiritual paths is because we're all in a different place and we have to do the one that resonates with us. So then I continued on my spiritual path, right? Faith, practice, and study. And realized that, oh, there's another component, community. Now, my Buddhist practice would talk a little bit about community. We would all come together and chant together, but they never really stressed the importance of it. And then I got involved in yoga. I went to a yoga retreat, fell in love, found Yogananda. I should say Yogananda found me. He came tapping me on my shoulder saying he wanted me to start learning what he had to teach. And so I found out I became what I call a Buddhist yogi. And so I started being a disciple of Yogananda's practice, still a Buddhist because I was interfaith, believed, all paths can lead to this place that you want to be, this self-realized, enlightened, one with God, whatever you call it, okay? So as I was on this path of following Yogananda, we got introduced to this spiritual community. We loved it. My wife and I decided to move there. I sold my house. We moved up to the spiritual community, and we lived there for 6 years. And we thought when we moved there that this was going to help keep us inspired, help support us in our daily practice, because we were committing to doing a practice every morning, every evening. I already did a practice every morning and every evening, but I had included meditation, and this was even before I found Yogananda. I had also started meditating. I was chanting and meditating. So when I found Yogananda, I just increased my meditation, continued my chanting, and we thought, great, this will be great. We'll be around like-minded souls. We'd be in a community that supports us, and we thought this will help keep us inspired. And we got to the spiritual community, and we started living there and practicing with the people, and then we found out that they were into a lot of dogma. That you had to follow the rules, you had to do it a certain way, and they were really serious about your spiritual practice. And when they got so serious, for me, now for the people that live there, bless them. If you found the community that works for you, I want you to kudos, I support you. But for us, this spiritual community took the joy out of my practice for me. There was so much peer pressure, and not that I fell to it. I was strong in my convictions of what I felt was true. I continued to chant and meditate and do the things, but there was still this peer pressure to do it the way the community thought you should do it. And that took the joy out of it for me. Now, I'm a believer in community. It's one of the things that I learned on the yogic path, how what they call satsang, community, having like-minded souls that are spiritually oriented, because their vibration, typically if someone meditates or chants a lot or really has committed to a spiritual path, they typically have, if it's a path that really is in truth of love and expansion and joy, they typically have a little bit higher vibration. And that higher vibration can help lift you up when you go and you pray or you chant and meditate with other people. Okay? But if it's caught in dogma, trying to keep you in strict rules, and this is how you do it, I have found that does not work. In fact, my wife and I started a spiritual community because we really are interfaith. We're both interfaith ministers, and we really believe that people need to cultivate and grow in the way that works for the way you are wired. See, you're wired differently than me. What I do may work for you because you may be wired very similarly to me. If you're an empath, and have other attributes that are like mine, what I do may work perfectly for you. But you may be slightly wired differently. And so one of the things in our spiritual community that we do is we offer different tools from different paths. And when I say tools, I mean different spiritual techniques. We might teach you a chant or a specific prayer or a meditation, or something we found that was helpful for us. And we might teach it to you. And we're not telling you have to do this. We're telling you experiment. And that's one of the biggest things I learned on the yogic path. And also in the Buddhist path, was that you take these practices and you do them yourself to see how they work for you. And if they don't work, you can let it go and try something different. Because the whole idea, and especially with the yogic path, is they have like these 8 different they'll call it like the 8-fold path. These 8 different ways are 8 different ways that maybe you're wired differently, and you need to focus on a different one of those ways than the one I focus on. But our community is all about helping support you in finding out how you're wired and what works for you, because that's one of the things that helps you stay out of spiritual rut, is when you actually do what works for how you're wired. Okay? Because if you start doing something just because someone said you should, or that this is the rule, it quickly becomes a habit or a should, and that is when you start to fall into a rut. So how you become aware so you don't actually get into the rut is you have to pay attention to how you feel. You have to become highly aware of what's going on within you. Are you doing your practice out of habit? Okay, that's a first sign. Or are you doing it because you should? And how are you feeling when you do it? Before you do it, when you do it, and after you do it. You really want to pay attention to those 3 things. If before you do it, you don't want to do it, that's a sign you're starting to go into a rut. Okay? If you do it and you're feeling good when you do it, that's good. That can motivate you to keep going. And if you feel good after you do it, that's even better, because that means you can take that feeling that you're feeling and bring it into your day. Because that's one of the things that's really important that people don't realize when you're on the spiritual path, is the goal is not to be just sitting there in meditation or when you chant and feel good at that moment, but it's to take that mystical experience, that feeling of joy or love or peace or calmness or wisdom or power that you're sensing, or the divine light or sound that you're sensing, and bring it into your day. So your life becomes miraculous. Your life becomes this one filled with joy and love and peace. Not, I feel good for these few minutes and then I go out into life and I don't feel so great. So that's, when you can go out and you bring it into your life, your spiritual practice is working, okay? And so you want to pay attention. That's one of the first things you do, so that you're not falling into a rut. Now, if you're already in a spiritual rut, then what I recommend is you got to bring in some diversity. Now, that doesn't mean you stop what you've been doing. If you've been meditating every day or chanting a certain mantra every day, I don't want you to give that up, because you've built up some momentum and some power in that, okay? But you've got to work with your human nature that needs something that's going to help bring you out of the rut, and more importantly than just out of the rut, but stay inspired. Now, why do you want to stay inspired? Because the whole reason why you sit down to do this every morning and every evening, or maybe you just do it once a day, and that's cool too, okay? But that you sit down to do these spiritual practices is to have your own mystical experience. So when you're inspired, not just I'm not in a rut, but I'm inspired, you sit down to your spiritual practices and you're like, I'm going to have a mystical experience. I'm going to experience the divine, right? And you sit down with that intention that that's going to happen. And at the end, whatever happens, happens, but you have that intention every time you sit down. And when you're inspired, that's what will happen for you. You sit down going, I'm going to have a mystical experience. It's one of the reasons why I call myself the creative mystic, because I'm wanting mystical experiences. Now, I have found when you bring creativity and mysticism, spiritual practice together, whoo, everything lights up more. Like, it's what enhanced and increased and awakened me to many spiritual gifts and powers, spiritual powers I did not know I had when I was young. So I really encourage you to start looking at what can inspire you. So when I lived in the spiritual community, I talked about that. I'm going to back up a minute here. And I thought, well, with all the rules, it made me actually go into a rut, having this rigidity. So you want to allow flexibility, as you're on the spiritual path. So, but the thing I did find was community was important. When I could find people who were encouraging to how I'm wired, that helped keep me out of a rut, could bring me out of a rut. It also helped inspire me, okay? But here's the very fifth thing that I found that was so important. So there's faith, practice, and study, which are really important on the spiritual path. Community, but it has to be the right community, the one that allows you to grow and expand in the way that you need to, because each spiritual path, your spiritual path, I should say, is individual. And you have to do what's right for you, what inspires you, what expands your heart and your awareness, okay? Because there's lots of spiritual paths and spiritual practices for a reason, okay? So that's 4. The 5th one I found, that I have not seen any spiritual community yet talk about this, but but it's something I have found that is so important if you want to stay inspired, is fun. You have to have fun, okay? Now, I'm not talking about fun like going out drinking. I'm talking about what inspires you to believe and remember that there's magic and miracles happening all the time, that the miraculous is here. And I'm going to share with you one of the things that does it for me. Now, the thing you've got to be aware of, if you want to bring this back into your life, if you've been feeling kind of in a rut, is you want to get in touch with your inner child. Because your inner child, before she got programmed, knew exactly what you needed to have fun, to stay joyful, to stay inspired, okay? And so when you connect back with that, when you listen to her, miraculous things can happen. So here's my latest little thing I've gotten, and this is it. This is Princess Penelope. Okay, it is a flying unicorn. So I saw this in this, and I was just like, oh, that is so cute. It reminds me that everything is possible. You know, when have you ever seen a flying unicorn? And especially one that's stuffed that flaps its wings, you know? But I thought, you hear about unicorns, you hear about flying horses, but not a flying unicorn. And so I was just like, I want one of these because it reminds me of miracles, magic, that anything is possible. But my adult self said, that's a waste of money. You don't need more stuffed animals. You know. But my little kid on the inside says, oh, that inspires me. That makes me happy. That brings out my joy. And so we went with the joy. Now, you want to look for those things that inspire you, that bring out your joy. Your inner child knows. And you have to start listening to the things that she is trying to inspire you to do or get that remind you of the miraculous, the magical, the mystical. Okay? Because that's what's going to keep you inspired. Not the rules or doing it this rigid way or the have tos, but how can you bring more fun into your practice? Okay, so I look at this, I push the little button, had the wings flapping, and then I go in and do my sadhana because it reminds me, oh yeah, anything's possible. There's magic, there's miracles, there's mystical experiences happening. I just have to be open to them and receive them. And so you want to find support in a community that will support you in that miraculous, mystical, magical experiences. And help you with some of the practical things of here's some different spiritual tools and techniques. Then you get to go experiment, because that's what also makes things inspiring and keeps you out of a rut, is when you're experimenting, right? When you do something new that you're trying to see, like, how is this affecting me? That's what you do when you take on these spiritual tools and techniques, is you experiment to see, you do it, how does this affect me? Is it actually positively helping me? Am I able to bring it into my day? That's what you want to do. That's what keeps you inspired, because when you can see that something you're doing in your daily spiritual practice is positively affecting you in your day, like maybe you have more peace or more joy or more love or more patience, to like deal with things that used to just make you frustrated, that's when you know, my practice is working. I'm going to keep doing it because I see the difference. Now, sometimes I want you to know it can be challenging for you to see the differences on your own, because I always tell people you've got a blind spot. It's yourself. So sometimes it's good to ask other people. My wife one time was doing this new practice and she thought it was a waste of time. And I said, oh no, since you've been doing this, I see how much more patient you are. And so, but she couldn't see that herself, but I could see it, that she had more patience from doing it. And so that's the true test, is if something is working. So I'm going to encourage you, one, to pay attention to how you feel, become more aware of what you're feeling, what you're sensing, so that you can take care of it before you fall into a rut. If you're in a rut, then you want to do something, like new. Bring in something new that can, like you can experiment with, that will like pique your interest, that you need to get out of a rut. And three, stay inspired. You've got to have something fun. That's the other solution. And if you're in a rut, is you've got to bring in some fun into your spiritual practices. It's something that I'm going to be bringing in more into some of my episodes, is talking about some of the fun things that you can do that are spiritual, because I have come to realize that, the spiritual path is not meant to be serious. It's meant to be enjoyed. And part of enjoyment is fun, right? And so if you want some support in that, feel free to check out our spiritual community. It's called Magnify Your Miracles. There's going to be a link below. We'd love to see you there as a member. If you want to know more about it, would love to talk to you about it. If you resonate with what I've shared with you, have any kind of comment or share, please, I love to see your shares and comments. And if you resonate with this, please subscribe. Love to see you subscribe and get notification when I release new episodes. And remember, greatness is within you. It's time to let it out. Remember, the miraculous, the miracles, the magic are here every day. Blessings.